Okay, so we're a bit out of sequence today, but we're going to show you the photo before the intro. The intro gets a bit carried away. As you can see, this is 4 separate images blended together to make the single shot of the waterfall. It is a long exposure image, and it's got quite a nice dreamy effect to it, which has been achieved by using something called the Orton effect. So let's go straight into the rest of the video. So I think the term people use nowadays is subtle foreshadowing, which is where you show a clip of something disastrous and then walk through how you got there. I think we'll do a bit of that. Last video we were up at Crome Hill, and on the way back the mirror of my VFR decided to snap clean in half. Unfortunately, attached to that mirror was my Insta360 X4. Both lens guards were smashed to bits. The mounting point for the camera was ripped off, so I can't actually mount it to anything right now. Bit of a disaster. Relevance to this video, I have no footage of the journey there. I will work on sorting some kind of solution to that for the next video. But the journey will be all about going up and down the hill at Lumsdale Falls, which is where we're heading today. So it's a beautiful waterfall, very, very easy to get to, a very, very small walk to get to the top of it. So I guess we'll jump to the bit where we're parking up. So with our journey being slightly compromised this morning, we'll pick up from the point of arrival. So you head up this road off Smooth Lane, and there's a big lay-by here with plenty of parking available. This is usually a good place to park. There's usually enough space. If not, you can go back down the road and have a little walk up. Just over this wall you'll start to see the river immediately. You can do photos here and get some nice shots, but if you follow the road up through the wooden gate up there and then head up a set of steps, you'll get to the top of the falls, which is the good view. Do bring walking boots with you for this one, and a tripod for sure. So we're going to head up and see if we can get a nice long exposure shot. So our spot's down there, but we're going to pop up to the top just to show you it. For the shot we're going for today, I've brought something called a neutral density filter with me. What the neutral density filter does is essentially slows the amount of light entering the lens, which means you can control the exposure with the filter rather than camera settings. So you can set the settings you want to use. For instance, you might want a wide aperture like the 2.8, and then use the neutral density filter to reduce the amount of light hitting the sensor in the camera, and that will allow you to do the kind of creative shots you want. The filter I've got is a variable ND, variable neutral density filter. So you rotate it to get a stronger or weaker effect, and it beats carrying lots of different ND filters with you. They are given in strengths. You can get a 2, a 4, an 8 and so on. This one varies between ND2 and ND400. It's a Neewer filter. I really do rate the Neewer stuff. The new microphones that I'm using today are Neewer CM28s. The bag I'm using is Neewer. I think the tripod might even be Neewer as well. They make really affordable but good quality kit, so I'm not sponsored by them, but I do recommend their stuff. So we'll go and pop our 82mm ND filter on and see if we can get a nice long exposure shot. I'm also going to do a quick 120 frame per second video, which is another feature of the Canon R5 that I think is quite impressive. So I'll pop that up first and then move on to the shot. So for the shot we were using the Canon 15-35 RF lens, and we were zoomed right in at the 35mm end. The maximum aperture on the 15-35 is f22. That's the smallest hole that you can have to let less light into the lens. This is what we used for the shot. The ISO, or sensitivity to light, was dropped right down to its minimum, which was L for low, which is ISO of 50 using the Canon R5's extended range. 100 is the normal minimum. There were 4 shutter speeds used: 0.3, 0.5, 0.8 and 1.3 seconds. These are relatively fast shutter speeds compared to some of the other shots we took. For long exposures you do need to use mechanical shutter, and subject to detect was set to none. The camera's self-timer was used. We set this to 2 seconds. There's a 10-second option as well. And we used the Canon app on our phone to drive the camera, so there was no risk of camera shake. So here are a few of the pictures taken on the day. Long exposure for all of them, and we got some nice effects on the water. These are all single shots rather than combinations that we're doing in this video. It's a great place to go and a really easy walk to get there too. So I would recommend it. So for today's image, we've got 5 separate pictures with progressively darker exposures, and we're going to combine these together to make the single final image. This will follow the same process we've done before. We keep the brightest image as the base, and then we go to the next one in the chain, select it all with Control A, Control C to copy it, and then paste it in with Control V, and it will appear as a layer over the top of the other image. Now those first 2 images are near identical, so we don't need that one. So it will be a stack of 4 images. So next darkest one in the chain, paste that in, close it down, and so on. Okay, so that's all 4 images in one frame. Now they were on the tripod, but you will see movement between the images. So what we'll do, we'll zoom in and use the rock as a fixed point and show the next layer in the tree. So that one goes up quite considerably. And then we'll just use the move tool at the top. And I'm going to use the cursor keys to move it around because I've got more control that way. If you hold shift, you make bigger movements. That's near perfect now. No rotation in this, which is good. So we'll go to the next layer. Okay, so layer 1, 2, 3, and 4. Okay, so we'll just check the alignment by zooming in very closely on a distinct object. 1 and 2, near perfect. 2 and 3, same. And 3 and 4, same again. So we'll zoom back out. So our darkest layer is showing, and then they get progressively lighter as we go through. So the first thing we'll do is crop the image now to lose any misalignment. Okay, so we've just got to lose a tiny bit at the top of the image. So I'll just crop to get rid of those. And that's it. As a base, that's okay. I'd say we could probably stand to boost the vibrance and saturation a little bit. So image adjustments, vibrance. And I'll pop the vibrance up a little bit to bring out the greens a little further. That's plus 19. And the saturation, just plus 8 on that. Because this is the light parts of the image, I'm going to run image adjustments, then shadows and highlights. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to take the highlights down a little bit. And I'm just going to make sure I've got a nice colour in the rocks that I'm happy with. That is representative of what it looked like, so I'm going to stop there. In terms of the shadows, maybe pull it a tiny bit. So plus 5% of shadows. So that's the base from which the rest of the image will form. So the background is exactly that, the background. Layer 1, I'm going to use to pull the left-hand side of the rocks through. So I'm going to rename that layer rocks. I'm probably going to combine layer 2 and 3 for the water. So I'll call layer 2 the water. And by water, I do mean the falls, rather than the water at the front, which I'll probably take from layer 1. Layer 3 will give us the colour in the top of the image, where it's blown out in the other longer exposures. So let's work through each of those. So from our background image, we're going to start with rocks on the left. So we'll create a layer mask, and we'll go to the bucket tool, which is G as a shortcut, and we're going to choose black, and we're going to paint the whole thing out. So that mask is completely invisible now. Then we're going to press B for brush tool, or click here. And then we're going to switch to white, or X is the shortcut to switch between the two. Now, our brush is quite large, which I want. This is 1240 pixels. And the opacity is 21%, which is actually really good for us. So we're going to use that white brush to just start bringing in the shading of these rocks. The large brush makes things look a lot more natural as we feather them in, and the opacity of 21% will really help too. Now if you hold shift, it will disable the layer mask when you click on it. So I'm going to do that to just look at the rocks and see how much further I can go. As you can see, I've pretty much pulled through those rocks fully. There's a little bit at the top here I can bring in. So we'll take that as well. Okay, so we've got those. Is there anything else from that image that I want in this image? I don't think so. So now we'll look at the water. So again, with this layer, we'll create a mask, G for the bucket tool, X to switch back to black and get rid of that, B for a brush, X to switch back to white, and now we're going to use this same big brush to start pulling in the water from the layer above. So this is a layer that has a darker exposure, so it makes the water look more defined. Just going to drop that brush size down to about 400 pixels and then zoom in a little bit and start pulling out this detail. So we'll just disable this layer mask to see what it looks like underneath. Okay, so we've pulled that through pretty well. Okay, so if we zoom back out, how's that looking as an image? If anything, a bit bright, but that's very easy to fix later on. Okay, our top layer is to pull in this top corner. That's the biggest part of the image we need here. So again, we'll create a layer mask, G for the bucket, X to go back to black, get rid of everything, B to switch back to brush, X to switch back to white. I will use a large brush for this one. So we'll go back up to 1700 pixels. I'm still going to keep the opacity quite low at 20% because I want it to feather in quite naturally. Okay, I'm going to drop the opacity a bit further, 10% now, just to make sure I don't get too carried away with this. And I'm going to pull some of the rocks as well, just to make them stand out nicely. Okay, disable the layer mask, enabled, disabled. Okay, there's still more to do on this bush for sure. Okay, disable it again. Re-enabled. So I like the light on the tree from this layer, so I'm going to go for a smaller brush. 140 pixels should do. 200 odd pixels should do. And then we'll just start pulling this in a little bit because the light looks quite nice on the layer above. It's not as blown out. Still got that very light touch on the brush. This is only at 10% still. So I could go over it a lot of times before a change is made, before you have a significant change. Just disable that layer mask. Okay, go a bit further with this. I'm going to bump that opacity up to 26%. And that one was a bit too much. Okay. Let's do a few more of the trees. Okay, so we've got a smaller brush, but a higher opacity now. So it has a much bigger effect. Okay, I'm going to go a bit larger with the brush size, about 400, 500, and then pull in these bigger rocks a bit. Okay, I think I'd like to lose the stick, which is coming right from the background layer. So I'm just going to use clone stamp. And that's quite a nice size, 400-ish pixels. So I'm selecting an area adjacent to it. So in terms of colour and texture, it's the same. And then just drawing over that. So we've doubled up a piece of quite distinct water there. So I'm going to grab a bit from elsewhere and just drop that over the top as well. Okay, that's a bit better. I've lost a lot of detail in the water by the length of the exposure, so I'm going to bring a bit more of that back from the top layer. So we'll go for about 200 pixels and opacity of about 50% for this. And we'll just we'll pull a little bit more. We're just on a brush tool with an opacity of 50%. About 500 will do, and we'll just pull a little bit. Oh, we'll drop the opacity down quite low for this, with 20% on a brush tool, about 500 pixels wide. About 500 pixels is fine, and we'll just use the mask of that top layer, and we're just going to look to bring in some more definition around this water. I don't want to lose all the white that we've included from the slower exposures, but I'd like to add a bit of definition in places. So if we turn the layer mask off, you'll see quite defined lines in places, which I'd like to bring through to this final image. And I'll turn the mask off again, and on, and off, and on. Okay, a little bit more definition in the center here. I'm going to select all the layers, and I'm going to duplicate them, and then I'm going to merge those layers. The reason I'm doing this is in case I do anything wrong, I can fall back to our original editing. But I'm going to just show the one layer, this duplication and merge of all the layers, and I'm going to play with this one. So the first thing I want to do, I want more green. So I'm going to go back to image adjustments, vibrance and saturation. I'm going to punch the vibrance up a little bit further. I like that, that's 28. And the saturation, that's at +7. I will have a look at the shadows once more as well. I'm going to drop that right down to 0. I'm just going to roll my mouse wheel forward until I get to an amount that I like. I like to crop the image. I want the waterfall to be more of a focal point than it currently is. So I'd like to keep this little bit of rock in if I can. And this tree is quite nice to have in as well. See what that looks like. That's better. That's much more focused on the waterfall now. Okay, I'm gonna do something called the Autumn effect. It's something that's been very popular in recent times on Instagram. It's been around since the 1980s, but it's a nice way of getting a real fairy tale feel about your images, but maintaining sharpness. So I'm going to lose the 4 layers below. I'm comfortable that I don't need those now. I'm going to start by duplicating my image. And the duplicated image I'm actually going to blur quite heavily. So I'm going to go filter, blur, and Gaussian blur. So one rule that people follow is that the number of megapixels of your camera is the number of pixels you should blur by. So I've got a 45 megapixel sensor. I should blur by about 45. And you know what? That's probably not far wrong. Okay, so we now have a very blurred layer on top. It's a normal layer. And we're going to change that to a screen layer. What screen does is it will take black parts of the image and not show them. White parts of the image will remain, and everything grey in between will get lighter. So we'll change this to screen, and you can see the black from the layer below has come through, the white has stayed, and everything else is very light. Now this is like the effect I want, but on steroids. So what we're going to use is the fill property of the layer, and if I drag that right to the left, you'll see the layer below. And that is the same as turning off this top layer and going back to our original image. And all the way to the right is a fairly wild effect. We're looking for something more subtle than that. So we'll probably end up about halfway as a maximum. But essentially just increase the slider until you reach a value you're happy with. And it's a case of looking at the image rather than the percentage. Exactly 50%. What are the chances? Okay, so with that effect in place, I'm just going to duplicate those 2 layers, and then I'm going to merge them together. And I'm going to turn off the 2 layers below. So I'm going to levels, Control L for levels, and the left-hand slider is the black point. So I'm just going to bring that in a little bit, which will darken the image and bring out those blacks. Also boost the colour. So that's quite nice. Now with that, I think I could tolerate more of an alternate effect. So I'm going to delete that top layer again, and then I'm going to increase the effect. I'm going to go to 71%, and then I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to duplicate the 2 layers, merge them together, and then I'm going to move that black point to the right. There we go. So that's maintained that ethereal fairy glen glow that I'm after. But the good thing about the alternate effect is if you zoom in, you still have the crispness and sharpness in the image. It hasn't actually blurred at all on the detail. I think I can pull the blacks a little further in. I'm looking at these rocks down here. And then I might have to pull back my saturation a little bit because the green is a bit too saturated now. Okay, just -2 on that. Okay, I'm just going to have a quick play with cropping again. Yeah, I think I prefer that. I think I'll go away for a few minutes and then come back to this one. Okay, the last thing I'm going to look at is a brightness and contrast tweak. It's the contrast I'm interested in, although that's going to make a big difference to the image, so we'll have to be careful here. I think that will do. That's 10. And I think I'll call that done. So I hope you enjoyed that video. It was a lovely trip. It's a really beautiful place and very accessible. One of the places I wouldn't hesitate to recommend to anybody, even with mobility issues, that's into photography, or even if you just want to have a look at a pretty waterfall. Really nice spot. If you like what you saw, please join us again for more content of a similar nature.